Cleansing the Doors of Perception by Huston Smith. Chapter 4. Historical Evidence. India's Sacred Soma. Now I've got to say a few words before I start reading this chapter, because of all the chapters in this book, this is the only one which is kind of in a different form. It has a lengthy introduction, which I'm not going to read. Then after that, there are some footnotes, pages of footnotes, which again, I'm not going to read. Then there's a lengthy section of criticism by others, and it points to their bulletins, their writings, their books. I'm not going to read that. I think that wouldn't be interesting. And then there's a section called The Book, and that's about Watson's book. And again, I don't think this would be particularly interesting because it's not about the book as in what's contained within the book, like the ideas and all that, but rather the book itself. How long the book is, how much it costs, how it was printed, etc. I don't think that's really relevant. And then there's a conclusion. I will read the conclusion. So I'll read the body of this chapter and the conclusion. But aside from that, I'm going to be really abridging it. So if you want to read the whole thing, get the book, I guess. And if you'd like me to read the footnotes, or if you'd like me to read the part that I skipped about the physical book, let me know in the comments below, and I'll tackle it. But I just don't want to bore you. Okay, so here we go. I've spent so much time recently reviewing the work of others that I'm growing impatient to get on with my own pursuits. But the thesis here considered is important enough to warrant another detour. Moreover, the excursion is bound to prove interesting, for it leads through one of the most colorful intellectual exploits of our century. Having mentioned both importance and interest, let me begin with the former. Alfred North Whitehead is reported to have remarked that Vedanta is the most impressive metaphysics the human mind has conceived. The extent to which it may have influenced our own Western outlook after Alexander's invasion of India does not concern us here. What is at issue is its origins. Etymologically and otherwise, Vedanta is the culmination of the Vedas, and the Vedas derive more than from any other single identifiable source from Soma. Would it not be useful then to know what Soma is? Not particularly. India herself seems to have answered, judging from her scholars' lack of interest in identifying the lost plant. That characteristic Indian casualness towards history again. Western scholars, by contrast, have been curious from the first. In the 2 centuries since Indiology became an academic discipline in Europe, 43 candidates for Soma were proposed in the 19th century, and in the 20th the number rose to a total of over 100. Any Indologist, it's a hard word to say, who settled the issue would have been assured of a permanent place in the annals, not only of Indian and religious scholarship, but of historical scholarship generally. Most ranking scholars had abandoned the quest as hopeless. This is where the story picks up, for when the answer arrives, and it will be the burden of my review that it has arrived, it comes not from a Sanskritist, Indiologist, or academician of any stripe. It comes from the outside world of professional scholarship altogether, from an amateur, a retired banker, and a high school dropout at that. But more. Let the master clue be one of the most improbable lines in all sacred writ. Sacred writ, capital S, capital W. Open quote. Full-bellied, the priest's piss, the sacred Soma. Close quote. A line which, verging on scatology, had regularly thrown the pundits into confusion and leveled the exegetes, E-X-E-G-E-T-E-S. Let the discovery surface in a bibliophile's dream that is a story in itself. Printed in a limited edition on handmade paper, the book became a collector's item overnight. Finally, let the subject fall squarely in taboo domain. The chaotic, puzzling, passion-filled world of the psychedelics, with all that word has come to mean to America in the last 15 years, and the reader can see why I felt that my own work could wait. The immediate occasion for my review is the appearance of Soma in a popular edition, but it is also time for a general stock-taking, because the 3 years since the book's initial publication have allowed time for reviews to appear in the major critical journals. In the pantheon, the Aryans brought with them, when they swept into Afghanistan and the Indus Valley in the 2nd millennium BCE, Soma occupied a unique position. Indra, with its thunderbolt, was more commanding, and Agni, A-G-N-I, evoked the awe that fire, so readily inspired before the invention of matches, made it commonplace. But Soma was special, partly, we may assume, because one could become Soma through ingestion, but also because of what one then became. Open quote. We have drunk Soma and become immortal. Close quote. The Soma hymns are vibrant with ecstasy. It appears to be virtually the only plant man has deified. The Mexican Indians regard mushroom, Ph.D, and morning glories as God's flesh, or in other ways mediators of the divine, but the plants do not figure in their pantheons. The crucial Mandala 9, the 9 here is the Roman numeral 9, so the crucial Mandala 9, consisting of 114 of Rig Veda's 1,028 hymns, is dedicated exclusively to Soma, as are 6 other hymns. But his significance extends far beyond these hymns, in which he is invoked in isolation. Soma saturates the Rig Veda. The entire corpus is shot through with Soma. The Soma sacrifice was the focal point of the Vedic religion, writes W.D. O'Flaherty, adding, and here's a quote from him, "Indeed, if one accepts the point of view that the whole of Indian mystical practice from the Upanishads through the more mechanical methods of yoga is merely an attempt to recapture the vision granted by the Soma plant, then the nature of that vision and of that plant underlies the whole of Indian religion, and everything of a mystical nature within that religion is pertinent to the identity of the plant." Louis Renou, R-E-N-O-U, once said that the whole of the Rig Veda is encapsulated in the themes Soma presents. In the course of the Soma's sacrifice, dried plants were steeped in water and their juice pounded out with stones and wooden boards covered with bull hides. This juice was then forced through wooden filters and blended with milk, curds, barley, water, ghee, and occasionally honey. To the priests who drank the holy brew, it is said to have had enough strength, to have given strength, magnitude, and brilliance. One has only to read the Soma hymns, Daniel Ingalls observes, to grant some truth to the claim. Then, even as the last parts of the Vedas were being composed, Soma disappeared. The Brahmanas, codified around 800 BCE, contain no mention of it. Reverence for the god persisted. His sacrifice continues to be performed right down to today, but surrogates replaced the original plant. Replaced the original plant. For nearly 3,000 years, Soma retreats to the mountain fastnesses from whence it came. Like a yogi in training, deliberately isolated, so his austerities won't be interrupted. Soma drops out of history, to the historian's dismay, as I remarked earlier. And the next section is entitled Enter Gordon Wasson, Wasson. In certain respects, Gordon Wasson was an unlikely candidate for the discoverer. He knew no Sanskrit, had no special interest in India, and his years were against him. Born in 1898, he was already in his 60s and had retired from his banking career when he turned to Soma. But it goes without saying that he didn't just stumble on his find. He was equipped for the search, ideally so, we can say with wisdom of hindsight. To begin with, he was intelligent. His career bears this out from beginning to end. Without having completed high school, he was appointed to teach English at Columbia University. Turning from that to journalism, he served as financial reporter for the New York Herald Tribune until his uncanny sense of the business world caused J.P. Morgan and Company to take him on and advance him in time to a vice presidency. And atop his basic intelligence, Wasson had erected a specialist's repertoire. Though he was neither scholar nor scientist by profession, there was a field in which he was a master, and it was the one that proved to be decisive: ethnomycology. Assisted by his wife, Valentina Pavlovna, a pediatrician who died in 1959, his work in this area had led to a rediscovery of Teonanco. I can't pronounce this. I'm going to spell this word for you. Teonanactl, which was the sacred mushroom of Mexico, and the worldwide attention it subsequently received. B. Publication in 1957 of a monumental 2-volume treatise called Mushrooms, Russia, and History. And 3. Which argued the possibility of the mushroom cult being man's oldest surviving religious institution. C. Repudiation as a founder of a science of ethnomycology, a name analogous to ethnobotany. D. Appointment as research fellow, in brackets later honorary research fellow, close bracket, of the Botanical Museum of Harvard University, and E, Honorary Research Fellow of the New York Botanical Garden and Life Member of the Garden's Board of Managers. These talents alone might have sufficed, but the longer one ponders the Soma discovery, the more facets of Gordon Wasson appear relevant, until one has to remind oneself that it wasn't the preordained purpose for which he was born. Though advanced in years when he hit the Soma trail, his health and zest for research, including fieldwork, had held up. 10 years later, he continues to sleep in a sleeping bag on a screen porch the year round in Connecticut, temperatures that can dip to 15 degrees below zero. His depth exploration of the Mexican mushroom. For years, he and his wife spent their annual vacation in joint expeditions with the great French mycologist Roger Heim, H-E-I-M, had made him directly experientially knowledgeable about entheogens and the way they function in a religious setting. Even the careers Wasson pursued on his way to Soma were only seeming detours. English and journalism gave him a feel for language, which was to grace his report when it appeared, and banking, being lucrative, enabled him to travel when fieldwork beckoned and to consult the authorities whose diverse areas of expertise, Sanskrit, history, philology, comparative mythology, folklore, art, poetry, literature, ecology, ethnobotany, phytochemistry, and pharmacology. He was fit with his own mycological knowledge to craft the solution. Also, when it became apparent that the Vedic references would be crucial, he could employ a talented Sanskritist, Wendy Doniger, D-O-N-I-G-E-R, O'Flaherty, of the School of Oriental and African Studies of the University of London, to translate the relevant passages. Wasson's comfortable circumstances bear too on Soma as the deluxe publication to which a later section of this review will be devoted. Its author is an aristocrat. Every dimension of his life has style. Finally, it was in Wasson's favor that he was not an academic. We need not go so far as Robert Graves and credit his innocence of a university education with preserving his genius. It is enough to share Professor Ingalls' suspicion, voiced in a testimonial dinner at the Harvard Faculty Club on the occasion of the publication of the book under review, that the specialists, each burrowing deeper and deeper into the narrowing shaft of his own specific competence, would never have discovered Soma's secret. The problem called for an amateur, a man who could approach it with innocence and love and across disciplinary boundaries. The concise Oxford Dictionary defines amateur as one who is fond of, one who cultivates a thing as a pastime. The French is stronger. My dictionary renders it lover, virtuoso. Wasson was an amateur mycologist in the French sense. His love and consequent virtuosity respecting the mushrooms rooted back into nothing less decisive than his love for his wife. In August 1927, newly wed and enjoying a vacation in the Catskills, they chanced on a forest floor that was covered with wild fungi. Their responses were exact opposites. He was indifferent, even distrustful, while she was seized with a wild glee. Some couples might have left the difference at that, but the Wassons were of an inquiring bent. Examining their difference, they found it to be rooted in a difference between entire peoples. Dr. Wasson, a white Russian who practiced pediatrics in New York, had absorbed almost cum laude with her mother's milk a solid body of empirical knowledge about mushrooms and a passionate regard for them. Even worthless varieties were arranged with moss and stones into attractive counterpieces. By contrast, Gordon, of Anglo-Saxon heritage, had been shielded from the plants, given to pejoratives like toadstool and exaggerated rumors of their toxicity. His people had been as mycophobic as hers had been mycophilic. In Russian literature, mushrooms figure in love scenes and pastoral idyls. In English, they are emblems of death. For over 30 years, the Wassons devoted much of their leisure to dissecting, defining, and tracing this difference until it led to the thesis, supported by comparative philology, mythology, legends, fairy tales, epics, ballads, historical episodes, poetry, novels, and scabrous vocabularies that are off limits to proper lexicographers, that at some point in the past, perhaps 5,000 years ago, our European ancestors had worshipped a psychoactive mushroom, and that their descendants had divided according to whether the fascinans, Facinans, in brackets fascination, or the tremendum, in brackets fear, of its holy power predominated. 2 years after the publication of Mushrooms, Russia, and History in 1957, Mrs. Wasson died, and Gordon, forced into life changes, and with a pension sufficient for his needs, retired from banking and promoted ethnomycology from his hobby into a second career. Soma was not on his docket. He wanted to look into the mushroom madness of New Guinea, which is still unresolved, it says in brackets, and why the Maoris of New Zealand shared the Eurasian association of mushrooms with lightning. Somewhere down the line, he intended to examine India's largely negative attitude toward mushrooms, and this led him to spend some weeks in 1964 at the American Institute of Indian Studies at Pune, where he began reading Renu's translation of the Vedas. It proved to be a turning point. During the days that followed on a freighter to Japan, a number of disjointed things he had learned during 40 years of research fell into place. The hypothesis that Soma was a mushroom, specifically Amanita muscaria, and I'll spell that for you, AMANITA muscaria, or fly agaric, came to view. From that point on, it was a matter of corroborating his hypothesis. The evidence. To enter all the evidence Wasson uncovered in his 5 ensuing years, the concentrated work in the libraries and botanical centers of the United States and Europe, and in the field in Asia, would be to duplicate his book. Instead, I shall summarize the evidence that he marshals for his conclusions under 6 points. Point number 1. The references to Soma contain no mention of the leaves, flowers, fruit, seeds, or roots that pertain to chlorophyll-bearing plants. They refer repeatedly to stems and caps. Number 2. All the color references to the Amanita muscaria All the color references fit the Amanita muscaria. There is no mention of its being green, black, gray, dark, or blue, the colors of vegetation, while the colors that are mentioned conform without exception to the mushroom's cap, bright red. The membrane, unique to the Amanita muscaria, that protects it in the early stages, brilliant white, or it's pressed. And then it says Soma, S-A-U-M-A, means to press, or it's pressed juice, golden or tawny yellow. Wasson makes the latter point by using quotations from the Rig Veda to caption this series of stunning photographs of the fly agaric. The color epithet that is invoked most often is Hari, H-A-R-I, which in Sanskrit seems to have run from red to light yellow, always accenting its dazzling and resplendent character, which the photographs that Watson himself took capture brilliantly. The hide is of a bull. The hide is of a bull, and then it says in brackets, red bulls are favored in India. The dress of sheep. This dress of sheep, the white membrane, is invoked by a variety of analogies. He makes from milk his robe of state, and with unfading vesture, brilliant, newly clothed, the immortal Soma wraps himself all around. He has taken to clothe himself in a spread cloth, like to a cloud. The mushroom's rupture of its embryonic envelope, too, is noted. He sloughs off the Assyrian color that is his. He abandons his envelope. Like a serpent, he creeps out of his old skin. The flecks of the veil that cling to the mushroom's crown after the veil bursts give meaning to he lets his color sweat when he abandons the envelope. Number 3. References to shape are equally opposite. The mushroom's head peering through the undergrowth while still in its white skin is the single eye. When the cap is fully formed, it mirrors the vault of heaven and is the mainstay of the sky. Or again, the curved cap can look like an udder. The swollen stalks were milked like cows with full udders, and its puffy foot like a teat. The priests milk this shoot like an auroral milch cow. Number 4, Soma alters the consciousness, but was not alcohol. It was an entheogen. The Aryans knew alcohol in the form of sura, S-U-R-A, a beer, but at the time allotted for Soma's preparation in the sacrifices precludes fermentation. Moreover, whereas the Vedas generally disapprove of sura, noting the muddle-headedness and other bad effects it produces, Soma is not only aduccuna, A-D-U-C-C-H-U-N-A, without evil effects, it leads to godliness. And then there's some quotes here. We have drunk the Soma, we have become immortal, we have arrived in the light, we have found the gods. What now can the enemy do to harm us? What malice can mortals entertain, amplify? O Soma, our lives, for the purpose of living. These splendid waters granting much protecting. Like fire produced by friction, may the waters inflame us, may they cause us to see afar and to have increasing welfare. Number 5, Geography fits Amanita muscaria requires for host the North Temperate birch forest, and the Indus Valley is bordered by lofty mountains whose altitude compensates for its southern latitude, south of the Oxus River. Amanita muscaria grows only at altitudes of 8,000 feet or more. And this fits with the fact that Soma was confined to mountains. Part of Afghanistan, where the Aryans resided before continuing their southeastward push, and the Hindu Kush, through which they entered the Indian subcontinent, are Amita muscaria country. Number 6. Finally, there is the line of the Rig Veda that I quoted at the beginning of this essay, which has the priests urinating diluted soma. The Amanita is an entheogen whose vision-producing properties are known to survive metabolic processing. Ritualistic, urine drinking forms a part of a number of fly agaric ceremonies that have survived to the present in Siberia and elsewhere, as translated by most Indologists. A verse in the Rig Veda reads, open quote, "The swollen men urinate the onflowing soma," close quote. There is, in addition, the fact that the Vedas mention a third filter for soma while describing only two. Wasson thinks this third filter could have been the human organism, which there is reason to believe reduces the nauseous properties of the fly agaric while retaining for as many as 5 ingestions the chemical missticism, which is in the dried mushroom, in the entheogenic agent. Okay, let me spell that word for you. musicimol. Okay, and I'm going to read that sentence again because that didn't flow very well. Okay, there is, in addition, the fact that the Vedas mention a third filter for soma while describing only 2. Wasson thinks this third filter could have been the human organism, which there is reason to believe reduces the nauseous properties of the fly agaric, which, while retaining for as many as 5 ingestions the chemical musicimol, which in the dried mushroom is the entheogenic agent. Okay, so the next section is the critical response, which I'm going to skip over because it's more or less a list of, who thought what. And then there's a section called the book, which I'm also going to skip over. And now we have the conclusion. Okay, and that's like about 3 paragraphs here, long paragraphs that I'm going to read. Okay, Soma seems to have been rediscovered, but why was it lost? Why was its identity lost in the first place? Wasson believes that its importance, coupled with the famed mnemonic capacities of the Vedic priests, rules out its having simply been forgotten. It must have been deliberately suppressed. In Soma, he proposes, as the reason for suppressing it, distribution problems. As the Aryans moved down the Gangetic plains, Gangetic plains, this high-altitude mushroom became increasingly more difficult to procure. Inconsistency, now the fly agaric now a substitute, proved ecclesiastically unworkable. A patron discovering that rhubarb was used in the sacrifice, while his neighbor got the genuine article, would be difficult. A crisis developed, and the governing Brahmins decided that the originals had to be eliminated completely. Recently, Wasson has been inclining toward a different reason, that the substance may have started to get out of hand. Quality declines in the last Soma hymns, and some border on irreverence. 3,000 years in advance of our times, India may have found herself on the brink of a psychedelic mess, like the one in America created in the 1960s. She wasn't able to close the door on it completely. Plenty of bhang-smoking sadhus, wandering ascetics, in whom it is impossible to determine whether sattva, S-A-T-T-V-A, in brackets, illumination, or tamas, in brackets, sloth, predominates, can be found in India right down to the present. But at the critical moment, Wasson hypothesized the Brahmins did everything they could to prevent such abuse. They would rather have the botanical home of their god forgotten than let him be subjected to profanation. If the hypothesis is correct, it would help to explain why the Buddha felt strongly enough about drugs to list them with murder, theft, lying, and adultery as one of the 5 forbidden things. It could also throw light on Zarathustra's angry excoriation of those who use inebriating urine in their sacrifices. Quote, "When wilt thou do away with the urine of drunkenness with which the priests delude the people?" Close quote. I will myself stretch this line of thought to its conclusion. Even among those who are religiously responsible, entheogens appear to have, in the parlance of atomic decay, a half-life. Their revelations decline. They are also capricious. Opening the gates of heaven at the start, there comes a time, and I can attest to this myself, when they begin to open either unto less and less, or unto the demonic. It is precisely apposite that the book that introduced the entheogens to the contemporary West, Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception, was followed quickly by his Heaven and Hell. It seems as if God can manifest himself through anything. It is equally the case that nothing can commandeer him and guarantee his arrival. It is compatible with the notion that the Absolute entered India by way of a mushroom to hold that sometime later it stopped doing so. Well, that concludes Chapter 4. And Chapter 5 is entitled The Sacred Unconscious. Okay, well, that was very interesting. I hope you found that interesting too. And till soon.